Hello, everyone, and welcome back to How Do We Function? This is episode 4. My name is Brianna, and today we have therapist Matt Traube with us, who deals with skin conditions. So, welcome, Matt.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Awesome, awesome. Well, before we begin, I just wanted you to introduce yourself a little bit to us.
Sure. My name is Matt Traub, of course, and I specialize in psychological aspects of skin conditions. And so I help people deal with some of the emotional influences that tend to impact a variety of skin conditions. And my work is really based on when people get stuck, when they've got a condition, they may have seen a couple dermatologists or a couple different people in various fields, and they can't really put their finger on what's either exacerbating it or what could possibly help manage it. And that's the work that I do. So I really work on the psychological angle of a skin condition.
And it's called psychodermatology, correct?
Well, psychodermatology is essentially the field that is really the intersection between dermatology and psychology. And I think what people have always understood, perhaps anecdotally, is, and anybody that's had a skin condition can see firsthand that not always, but often their condition can either flare up due to psychological issues. Classic ones are things like stress. There was a great study in 2003, a Stanford study on acne that just observed students during examination periods versus non-examination periods. And of course, the findings suggested that acne was increased during examination periods. And so the field is essentially dealing with the emotional, the psychological component of what's impacting the skin condition.
Oh, great. Well, in your office, what kind of conditions do you usually see?
I see a lot of people with alopecia, eczema, psoriasis. I do a lot of skin picking and hair pulling disorders that fall under body-focused repetitive behaviors. I see a lot of people for acne. Acne tends to be a big one where people say, not only do I have it, I was hoping that it would eventually go away as I aged out of it, which doesn't always happen to people, and tends to be a difficult problem that many people fixate on and which slowly takes over their lives. I help people with warts and urticaria, what do I want to say, rosacea, and sometimes I even see people with, I guess, what would be referred to as undiagnosed conditions, where they'll have a certain amount of inflammation that exists, and nobody can diagnose it, and it sort of comes and goes, and we try to figure out what's behind it, beneath it, and what's causing it, and when do we see sort of things get a little better or worse. So even some people where it's really undiagnosed.
So you see a range of different conditions.
I do see a range. I would say that some areas are heavier than others. When we think about the rates of people having some of these conditions, there are a very large portion of people that are dealing with different compulsive disorders. Things like skin picking and hair pulling are two main ones. That tends to be a surprisingly big percentage of people. So a lot of people that are suffering from that. I think there's also a lot of crossover among skin conditions. Anybody that's had a skin condition for a lot of years can tell you how debilitating it is. And there's actually been some good research out there that really shows it can be, in many cases, as debilitating as dealing with any major medical issue. But people also know, if you've dealt with it, that it's often trivialized and people don't necessarily treat it or acknowledge it in the way that other mainstream medical conditions are.
Yes.
So, right. So that when I think about the emotional impact of skin, on one hand, I do help people with the skin condition itself, but the skin condition often presents a lot of emotional problems as well that we work on.
Yes, I've been told many times, it's just a skin condition. Yes, it's just a skin condition, nothing more. But in that regard, what are some of the positive impacts that you've seen with your approach?
Yeah, well, so essentially, it's the idea is how do we learn how to kind of better manage whatever's going on. Let's take psoriasis or eczema, for instance. Um, there are psychological underlying factors that often impact it, and people will acknowledge things like I feel anxious when I do this, and all of a sudden I see my psoriasis or eczema flare up. Things like when I was stressed out here, I noticed I had an outbreak. And so when you help people manage the psychological components, not always, but often you can help them really reduce flare-ups and learn how to control. And in some cases, in some conditions, sort of when you have it, you have it, and so you help people learn how to manage it. In others, there are some cases where you can actually make it go away. And I even when we think about skin picking, hair pulling, things of that nature, my job there is to help people really learn how to decrease it and manage it. And it's very possible to go from I might see somebody in the beginning, I might say, well, I probably pick my skin 70 times a day. You say, okay, 70 times a day. It's really sort of a constantly multiple times
Right.
per hour. And after enough sessions of learning how to control it, all of a sudden they go, yeah, I didn't really, there's no picking this week, and things of that nature. So it depends. When I think about skin conditions in general, I always think it's a variety of genetic factors, environmental factors. There's multiple variables at play. So my hope is if we can sort of just adjust a little bit one of those and give somebody some relief.
Well, when it comes to your patients, do you mostly see adults or do you actually see teenagers and children as well?
Uh, Many adults. I do see a lot of teens, a lot of young adults. I'd say more adults, less children. When I think about some of the interventions and things that I use, a lot of it is more of a hands-on approach. So even if you see me, let's say once a week or once every other week, I'm often giving exercises and things to do in between
Mm-hmm.
to work on whatever the issue is. And although that can be helpful to a certain degree for children, I think at some point, I've sort of noticed maybe below 7, 8, right, depending on how the developmental stage that the child's at. Sometimes it's hard to just stick with that. So I do. I mean, I do sessions sometimes with a parent and a child, but I'd say generally it's more often um, teens, young adults, and adults for the
Okay.
most part. Yeah.
And I think one big question I was thinking about was uh, working with a dermatologist. Do you think, like, in the future it'd be really good to have both of you guys in the same office, or do you feel you guys should remain separate with your jobs? I don't know.
Uh-huh. I think working to get. I mean, I think it's happening. So let me to a small degree. So let me just in my experience, I certainly work with dermatologists who will get a number of people and say, I think there's some sort of psychological influence here. It could be helpful if they see you. There's also some conditions that it doesn't necessarily make sense for a dermatologist to treat. So yeah, I think skin picking is a great example. When somebody comes in, as helpful as dermatologists are, it's hard to sort of sit and have session after session with somebody to help take care of that. And so the model isn't necessarily the best fit. So often they'll take care of sort of outside what things look like, and if people have scarring or really um, picked and created something that they need a little bit of dermatological assistance just to kind of resolve initially what they
Mm-hmm.
pick, which is very helpful. But a lot of dermatologists understand it's helpful to have somebody that they can say, look, I don't, this is not something I specialize in, but we've got a therapist over here who does and can help you. So I do think that it is very helpful, and I think a lot of dermatologists tend to be open about it because they see it enough. They see enough patients where they say, well, they need some extra help. And it's just, dermatology is obviously an incredible field that helps a lot of skin conditions, and there's a few that just they're more psychological.
Hmm. Well, awesome. Thank you so much. Those are all the questions I have, but I wasn't sure if there's anything else that you would like to say, any advice or.
Sure. I think I would tell people, I think that in general, the field of psychodermatology is not well known. When I start working with any patients and they say, well, I had no idea that somebody could help me with, this skin condition. I wish I knew earlier. I wish I knew 20 years ago. And I think in general, skin conditions, unfortunately, cause people to isolate. It's very difficult. There's a lot of guilt and shame behind them. And instead of going out and reaching for help, I think most people retreat and try to deal with it alone. And so I think my thought is to um, look for help, because there are people that are experienced in these fields and can be very helpful, especially when you're sort of dealing with something that has been persistent for a lot of years and is feeling quite overwhelming. I would say reach out for support.
Yeah, especially with red skin syndrome. I mean, usually people with red skin syndrome have been dealing with skin condition for a plethora number of years, so it's definitely not just a skin condition. It definitely comes with depression, anxiety, social isolation, things of that nature. So,
Huh?
I mean, speaking with you, it's really enlightening because I had never heard of psychodermatology before until I spoke to a doctor in the UK who was
Uh,
working with that, and then she
uh,
referred me to your father, and then I met you. So it was
uh,
just it's an interesting field that I think people should definitely take a look at. So,
yeah.
but
Well,
thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure. And if there's any information that you want me to put on my website or under this video, I will be happy to post it. I don't know if you have a website that you'd like to share or anything.
I do. It's just matthewtraube.com. I also do a little blogging for Psychology Today about skin conditions, so you can see some of that out there.
Mm.
And so I'll have my own blog on there and write about a lot of these basic skin conditions that people are experiencing and kind of how to deal with it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on.
All right, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
And I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too.